So, I actually didn't know what to call this video at first, and I guess I'm just gonna call it, I don't know, top whatever number ends up being favorite. I don't know, like, my favorite forms of media, maybe? I don't know, like, I'll just call it my favorite forms of media or something like that. You'll see it when I upload the video. Like, what the file name ends up being, you'll see. But, yeah, I have a lot of different favorite forms of media. Like music, comics, or books in general. Art, be it, artwork, like, pictures and stuff. Or if you want to get realistic about it, statues and stuff like that. Like, I'm a very, very interesting kind of person, I guess. No, I don't mean like an egotistical way. I mean, like, I really am. Like, people will tell me that I'm very interesting to talk to in general. Other people say that about me, but I digress. I'm not going in any particular order, so I'm not sure which form of media I'm going to start with. In case you couldn't already tell, it's kind of blatantly obvious. I don't use scripts, so if the video seems kind of disjointed, that's the reason why. It's also why I stutter and pause like that, for instance. I also will be doing this, occasionally picking up and putting back down my iPad, because I've said it before, I'll say it again for those who are a little bit confused as to why I keep doing that. I don't have a case for my iPad to prop it up yet, and on top of all that, my actual laptop, it works just fine, but let's be honest, the video quality and the audio quality of the microphone itself sucks. Which, thankfully, that wasn't really an excuse on my part, but thankfully, I am getting a new microphone, I think, really soon. I'm not entirely sure. I do have one coming in the mail at some point, so consider this more or less a compensation of sorts, I guess. Where should I start? I really do have a lot of choices to work with. I guess video games, considering that, at least from my experience, that's the easiest thing to cover. I think I might do the one game per system rule that I come up with during the preparation of this video. And no, for the most part, digital games don't really count. I say for the most part because all of my Switch games, except for one, are digital. Like, I do have this weird, I don't know if I call it a rule. Motorcycle. I don't know if I call it a rule, but like more or less standard, I guess, where I don't get a physical copy of a game unless it's something that's, only cartridge or disc-based media. Like, for example, Cave Story 3D for the 3DS is a prime example of that. It never actually had a digital release, which is very, very strange. Fun fact about that game, in the meantime, while I go looking for games to showcase in this part of the video, Cave Story 3D is one of the rarest 3DS cartridges in general, but its rarity in general is very, very strange. I remember it going something like this. So if you get the cartridge by itself, it's uncommon. Like, it's not close to rare or anything, it's just more or less uncommon. If you get the game complete in box, like, complete with the manual and inside the case, it's apparently slightly rare or close to rare or whatever. If you get a copy of the game brand new, like, especially in the modern day and age, it's rare / very rare. But if you get the game brand new with the holographic sleeve, which looks really cool, by the way, it's one of the rarest things ever. Yeah, it's really hard to explain for those who aren't familiar with that game. That version of the game specifically. It's very, very hard to explain. But I guess I'll start with the DS. Not the 3DS, just DS. Because again, most of my 3DS games are digital. Like, I only have 4 physical games. Let's see. Not sure if you guys can hear the clicking and clacking of me going through my DS cartridges. I don't know why I like that sound so much. I really don't know how to explain why I like it. Let's see. I mean, yeah, despite the fact that I said I do one game per system, I think I'm gonna actually break that rule, because, well, I don't know, it adds more variety, I suppose. There goes Frogger Helmet Chaos, by the way. It almost fell off my bed. I guess I'll go with the 1 per franchise rule instead, because that'll be easier on my part. Let's see. Don't want to go overboard, like I don't want to have an excessive amount of games per system either. Pardon me. And yes, for those who are wondering, I am a collector of games, and I am a hardcore gamer, an actual gamer. I went over that in one of my more recent videos, and I want to go over that again, because that'll be repetitive and annoying. Alright, I actually have a replacement new Nintendo 2DS XL, which happens to be... those right there. The Pokeball Edition, which, by the way, one of my favorite details about this particular version is you can actually press the Pokeball button. I just love that for some reason. It doesn't actually do anything, it's just there to be like a little reference. Like a nice little detail, I mean, pardon me. Going in no particular order, Battle of Giants Dragons is an awesome adventure game. Oh, don't know what that was. It's a great adventure game that doesn't really get a lot of attention, even in the modern day and age. I actually did a video on Battle of Giants Mutant Insects, which is the other game in the Battle of Giants series that I do have. The last one that I need to complete the trio is Battle of Giants Dinosaurs. Interesting fact, the series in general is known as Combat of Giants in PAL regions for some reason. Which I bring that because when they re-released whatever, Battle of Giants Dinosaurs, they released it as Combat of Giants Dinosaurs 3D. I don't really know why that was. I really don't know. But going back to Dragons real quick, it's a very, very fun adventure game that more people really should give attention to in the modern day and age. It's very underrated. Crash Mind Over Mutant. I said this before in the last video that I made, but it kind of bears repeating for the sake of hilarity. Crash Mind Over Mutant DS is hated because Crash is apparently a 2D side-scroller now. Funny, because those people have absolutely no problem playing the Crash games on the GBA, which are also 2D side-scrollers. I'm not even sorry for that anymore at this point. SpongeBob's True for Square is an amazing 3D platformer for the DS that also does not get a lot of attention in the modern day and age. And no, not just because I'm a SpongeBob fan. Like, I love it because of it. Like, not just because it's fun, but also because of its soundtrack. I've said this before a few times on this channel, but it also bears repeating. Tomoyoshi Sato is a composer that does not get any praise at all. Like, he's not even underrated. He's very underappreciated. Like, nobody talks about him in any conversation related to video games. Video game soundtracks, I mean. Like, it's kind of sad once you realize it, considering that that man clearly put a lot of hard work into his works. And speaking of that, he also did the soundtrack for Phineas and Ferb Across the Second Dimension for Nintendo DS, which is also a 3D platformer. So I don't really have much else to say, because it's more or less just the exact same kind of gameplay style, except with Phineas and Ferb, with a Phineas and Ferb plot and characters. I mean, my favorite thing about this version, this game, is how it actually has fully voice-acted cutscenes, which is really, really cool. Frogger Helmet Chaos was the very last quote-unquote good Frogger game. I actually say that because you guys know how the Crash Bandicoot series is known for being very mismanaged and all over the place. Well, I've actually rewatched the entirety of Nitro Rad's Frogger retrospective. Oh boy, Frogger had it just as bad, if not worse. The series sales in general went in a downward spiral after the universal hatred of The Great Quest. Which, yes, The Great Quest is hilariously bad. I'm actually trying to track down the GBA version of that game so I can experience it for myself. Because I actually want to, well, experience it for myself. I'm actually really curious. Garfield's Nightmare is a underappreciated 2D platformer. Like, a lot of people write it off as generic, bland, uninspired, but for those of you who missed my short video upload thing from, I think, a week ago, actually, I'll mention it as a fun fact, again, for those who missed it, but fun fact, the illustrations, they're not, like, animated, like, they're stills, they're comic book stills. Those illustrations were made specifically for the game. Like, they weren't taken from any comic strip specifically. Like, they were... It was artwork made just for the game, is what I'm trying to say. And that actually goes on... That carries on by extension to the game's manual, which, yes, I do have the manual over on my bookshelf, but I can't show off at the exact same time because, again, I don't have a case to prop up my iPad, so I'm sorry. Batman the Brave and the Bold is a really awesome platform slash brawler slash beat 'em up game. I actually don't know how to describe it other than that. Like, it was also made using the exact same graphic and gameplay engine as, was it Thor God of Thunder for DS, the DS version specifically. It plays the exact same way as this game. And they both have the exact same composer, that being the legendary Jake Kaufman. I don't think Jake Kaufman needs any introduction. And by the way, with both of these games, it's a very, very noisy day outside. Yeah, our neighborhood is very, very noisy in general, just keep that in mind. I was never a Garfield or even Batman fan before I even started playing these games. So keep that in mind. All more the reason why I'm actually willing to take chances. One more thing about Brave and the Bold. That game, Thor God of Thunder for DS, and Contra 4, those all run the exact same graphical engine, and they all have soundtracks composed by, again, the legendary Jake Kaufman. Sorry if there wasn't really much to cover in terms of those games. I'm not done yet. Like I said, I'm just going over these system by system, I guess. I only have one physical 3DS cartridge that I actually play a lot. One physical 3DS game that I play a lot, that makes more sense. And that would be Phineas and Ferb Quest for Cool Stuff. I know I said I wouldn't, break the one per franchise rule, but keep in mind this is on a different system. Well, yes and no, because this game came out in what I call the excessive era. You know, the era where games were on PS3, 360, 3DS, DS, Wii, and Wii U. Anyone else find that kind of excessive and also fascinating at the exact same time, or is that just me? Actually, ironically enough, Thor God of Thunder was one of those games, although, again, the DS version was completely different. I actually like this game a lot, and I have to point this out as well. I was never a Phineas and Ferb fan even before I even got into this game, originally. Like, I can openly mock myself by pointing this out. Like, when someone, I actually forget who, told me that, that show was for babies, like, I took that literally. Like, I thought that show was, like, well, for preschoolers. And then, like, all I remember beyond that is that kind of person was the exact same kind of person that spends all of their time watching R-rated movies and playing M-rated video games. So they aren't ones to judge. Ignoring that, though, it's pretty well executed. Like, the writing is on par with the show. And the jokes, like, the dialogue, the writing, the jokes, like, I'm gonna say it, especially for those of you who haven't heard me say this before. It's essentially a playable episode of the show. No, seriously. The reason that I brought up that, it's kind of sort of not really breaking my rule is because I do actually have it. I have the DS version. The DS version is completely lifeless. There is no voice acting. Why? Like, that excuse fades in the mud because, remember, Across the Second Dimension for DS, it had voice acting. Come to think of it, Phineas and Ferb and Phineas and Ferb Ride Again, which were also DS games, also had voice acting. I'm not trying to, whine or complain. If anything, I'm actually more or less curious. I don't know if the team for the DS version didn't have much of a budget. I actually would not be able to tell because the 3DS version is more or less the exact same game, but, with voice acting. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to try this game for yourself, if you want the console experience on the go, this is what I'd safely call the definitive version of the game for that reason. And also, bear in mind, again, I'm not going to play any of these games on camera, because that makes the video longer than it has a need. Like, it doesn't need to be a long video, as I'm trying to say. This video will be long enough already as it is. Let's see. Well, not necessarily, it's not a cartridge or anything like that. It's something that it's still a video game. It also gives me a blatant excuse to point this out. While I'm all for, historical relevance and stuff like that, I actually grew up with the Game Boy Color version of Super Mario, which is a little bit better and has a save feature. Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. Thank you, brain. Like, I understand Super Mario Bros. Historical importance and relevance, absolutely. But, like, a ton of people who say that this game is the best thing ever tend to be really nostalgia blind, and as a result can't throw around legitimate criticisms. Like, no, not like, I'm not saying that, that this game is awful or anything like that. It's just dated. Like, it's a very important piece of video game history, like I said, but, like, a lot of those people that claim to be professional critics end up not being professional critics and end up being frauds in hindsight once you realize that all they do is agree with the general consensus and that's it. But again, I can still respect Super Mario Bros. As a piece of gaming history. Like, if I just went on, like, this stupid tirade and said that, oh, there goes my lights again, and, started saying things like, oh, this game sucks, it's archaic, it's generic, it's bland, whatever. Like, what would that make of me, you know what I mean? Like, it's something that I play sparingly. Like, if I'm playing it for, like, say, research, like a research context, like, I'll play it in short bursts. But it's a game that, again, is very, very dated. Like, I don't play it for pleasure, like, enjoyment, unless, like, it's a game I only play if I have to. Like, if it's something that I have to, like, study for historical context, what I'm trying to say. Like, an example of that kind of rule in the animation world, for instance, the Disney movie Snow White is a movie that you're not going to want to watch, for personal viewing pleasure, but it's something that you watch if you're, like, doing research on animation history in general. A similar thing can again be applied to Super Mario Bros. You don't play that game unless you're doing research on gaming history. And the exact same thing applies to The Legend of Zelda. Which, yes, I do have in Game & Watch form over here. Pardon me. I can't really say much else because I'd just be repeating myself. So, put that in the exact same category for the exact same reason. It's a game that you never play for fun. You play it for historical context. And also, again, I'm not being hypocritical. Like, those are games that I do respect. They just haven't aged very well. Let's see. Game Boy Advance. I'm talking about games so much, I have to make sure that I cover these other forms of media that I wanted to talk about in this video. Let's see. In the meantime, while I go looking for games to cover, I'm not sure if people found it kind of suspicious when I, stopped talking when there was a police car driving by the other day during one of my videos. That wasn't like suspicious, but it's actually because how recently was it? Like, recently there was actually a murder in my neighborhood, and ever since then, like, actually even before that, like, it's been kind of hectic around here. Like, there's been a lot of violence and stuff going on, so the reason I stopped and I didn't actually say, oh no, for those who are curious, I was like, oh. Like, I was just like, oh, not again. Like, it's very, very common in our area for there to be a lot of chaos. Like, it's a very, very noisy neighborhood. You'd be really surprised, yes, in spite of how for the most part. Quiet it is right now. And because I brought that, people are probably going to be, asking if I'm safe, if my family's safe. The answer is yes, thankfully. So please don't worry about me or my family. We're safe. Let's see. Let's see. I really do have a lot of games in my collection, don't I? Yes, I do. Okay, I'll go with these. In terms of Game Boy Advance games, which I actually have, I have more Game Boy Advance games rather than Game Boy or even Game Boy Color games, so pardon me. I'm still accumulating parts of my collection. Ironically enough, I have Iron Man and Exo and Heavy Metal, I think is what it's called. That's coming in the mail at some point soon. Which also reminds me, I actually have to get my hands on Captain America and the Avengers for Game Boy, which that's actually a really funny game to talk about because did you guys know that the reason that game is so valuable was because of how awful it was seen as back in the day, which I bring that because I said a similar thing about, how people dunked on the Invincible Iron Man for Game Boy Advance when it first came out. It was seen as shovelware that you could buy for $2. Whereas now it's worth $79.99, which is why I don't take professional critics seriously, especially considering that they're frauds in hindsight. But, yeah. Game Boy Advance. Rocket Power Dream Scheme, it's a really interesting platformer game in the way that it's very, very lengthy. Although a lot of people probably aren't going to like it because it's a game that uses a password system. I've explained this before, but the reason that a lot of Nickelodeon games, I think actually licensed games in general, but for the most part, it was usually mostly Nickelodeon games, use password systems. It was actually because Nickelodeon, for the most part, they were against it. I'm trying to remember, someone actually commented in that video that I posted about that recently. Someone mentioned another game, but, very few Nickelodeon games for Game Boy Advance specifically actually used established save features. A few of my favorite examples are Danny Phantom, the Ultimate Enemy, SpongeBob Creature from the Krusty Krab, again, specifically the GBA version. And I think... Oh, man, I'm trying to remember what that person said in the comment section. Oh, man, I am so bad at remembering certain things like that. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that it's a really underappreciated 2D platformer, which has really, really amazing frame-by-frame animation, even for Game Boy Advance standards, by the way. You look up gameplay footage, or you look up footage of the cutscenes, they're very, very fluid, frame-by-frame. I've had this literally since 2004. I'm not even kidding. I know that sentiment of, oh, this brings me back to my childhood, but, in the case of this cartridge specifically, that's literal. I've literally had this cartridge since 2004. It's not my original copy in the way that I lost my first one back in 2004, but my mom got me a replacement copy in 2004, if that makes sense. Which is why this is a very, very sentimentally valuable cartridge to me. And don't worry, I'm not gonna let nostalgia and memories get in the way of, actual legitimate criticisms. In the case of ROTFD, which that'd be Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, yes, there's a lot of backtracking, and yes, it's very, very tedious as a result. In Super Sponge's case, the knockback is really, really excessive, to the point where if you land on, say, spikes or lava or acid, you're going to bounce all over the place, and you will die. Fun fact about Super Sponge, it doesn't matter which version you're playing, either the GBA or PlayStation version, that game actually had a very rocky development cycle. I think the reason the PS1 version had more prototypes was because that was the very first SpongeBob game to be released on a home console, from my understanding. There's actually an entire archival system / channel thing dedicated to archiving as many pieces of information related to Super Sponge prototypes and betas as possible. Even if you're not a fan of SpongeBob at all, which I can't see why anyone wouldn't like SpongeBob, even if you're not a hardcore fan of SpongeBob, I guess, you will find something interesting about that. Especially for video game history alone. Like, it's a very, very interesting thing to research. Frogger's Adventures Temple of the Frog. It actually has a similar history to the Invincible Iron Man for Game Boy Advance, in the way that I actually used to see this game everywhere in shovelware bins. Like, I used to see this thing everywhere. I'm not even exaggerating. Like, there were so many secondhand retro video game shops that would list this game for $2. And I actually got my copy recently on eBay for, I think, 20 or 25. And I'd actually imagine the reason that game's value went up was probably solely because of Nitrorad, digging up from obscurity and actually, actually showcasing how great of a game it is, which, yes, is a very, very great game. Like, he's actually the reason why I, got so invested into the Frogger series in general. Like, the very first Frogger game I actually played in my entire life was the Game Boy version, which is supposed to be a quote-unquote port of Frogger, which most people call Frogger He's Back. It's the PlayStation version. I actually had that, but I believe I got that after the Game Boy version of the game. And then I had Swampy's Revenge. I never actually beat either of those two PlayStation games, by the way. Also, apparently there's a Game Boy Color version of Swampy's Revenge that uses a save feature, which baffles me because it plays just like an arcade version of Frogger. Like, it's not one of the story-driven ones, so it kind of baffled me once I found that out. I actually might get that to, experience it for myself. Enough about Frogger's Adventures Temple of the Frog, though, or Frogger in general. Fairly Odd Parents Breaking the Rules is very, very strange in the way that it's a Contra clone. Like, I can actually hear the chatter in the room. Yes, we want to make this game difficult for the kiddies, so we're going to make a Contra clone. Like, who thinks of Fairly Odd Parents and Contra in the exact same context? Like, that is the most random, out of nowhere thing they could have ever done. Then again, like, Fairly Odd Parents games in general are very, very strange. Which, yes, like, could be intentionally funny, because, it's called the Fairly Odd Parents, so, those games are probably intentionally made to be very, very strange. But even then, like, even by that criteria, like, those games are just weird, dude. But hey, I'm all for the cartoonish weirdness, I guess, so I can't complain. Putting my iPad back down for a minute. I don't think I have any more games that I have to showcase on camera. Like, especially the ones that I've already talked about extensively, because, I just be repeating myself. So, I guess I don't know what I should do next. I might just talk about 2 more forms of media rather than just, like, doing everything, like, I still haven't done electronic gaming, music, artwork, etc. I don't want to do, like, all this in one video, so I might do a part 2, because I don't want to, like, waste your guys' time. There I go, hit the thing again. So, let me make it easier for everyone and just find, I'll just talk about electronic games and I'll wrap up this video. Because I'm pretty sure you guys are all getting tired of me rambling and stumbling and stuttering over my words, which, again, for those of you who have missed that, I've said this before, I have a hard time speaking in general, like I tend to rush my words quite a lot. If you've been listening to me commentate in this video, for instance, you would have already noticed that. What should I cover for electronic games? You. Also, this video is going to have a thumbnail. I've been doing that recently because even with the main catalyst being, I have older videos that do have thumbnails, you'll notice that a lot of my more recent ones don't have thumbnails. I actually don't like using thumbnails or the concept of thumbnails in general because I see them as very manipulative. Is that just me? Like, hey, at least cut me some slack in terms of, the Simon retrospective thing, because with, the way that YouTube automatically generates random parts of whatever video as an actual thumbnail, it tends to get very, very annoying. Like, that's the only time that I actually use thumbnails for a legitimate reason, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't. What I'm saying is that I don't use thumbnails anymore. I actually got one of these recently. Before anyone asks, no, this is not the original printing. This is actually a reprint / reissue of the 1990s Tiger Electronics Spider-Man game. Which also, for those who are curious, and for those who are not aware, they didn't redesign anything, they didn't repurpose anything. Like, the only thing they actually changed was the battery compartment, which actually has a screw on it now.
The time is 9 o'clock a.m.
That's my watch, my talking watch. Like, pretty much everything is the same, like, the way the game is built and everything. Like, they didn't even, like, improve anything, which, yeah, sounds horrible, but, like, they wanted to stay as true to the homage as possible. Like, look, they even have the original artwork and everything. They could have easily made new art, for instance. I think it even sounds the same. I've never actually had one of these as a kid, so I don't know if this is the exact same sound font. Somebody please correct me in the comments. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the original sound design. They do run on the exact same batteries they did when they were released in the 90s, that being 2 AA's. I don't have much else to say about that because, you know, I haven't really, I never grew up with those, so I have next to no experience with those. Next up is Tickle Toes. I know, I keep repeating myself in terms of that game, but, like, I can talk about, you know, the good and the bad. The good being how hilarious it is that that game was so freaking obscure, and then, because I kept making videos on it, like, everybody still wants one of these. Everyone. Like, so many electronic gamers I talk to want one of these. And then there's the bad. I'll just, you know, get out of the way because, you know, it's getting old. Hasbro killed it immediately so it wouldn't succeed. And considering Hasbro's dubious business practices, it's not a surprise. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in one of my older videos. Like, I really can't remember if I posted a video on this, but we do have confirmation on who voiced the game. His name is Marty Moran, and he actually does have social media, believe it or not. He's on Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. But, yeah, like, aside from the way this game was treated absolutely horribly, I really do enjoy this game. I really do enjoy this game quite a lot. It's a very, very goofy and silly game. Let's see. Just 2 more electronic games, and then I'll be done with this part of the video. I will probably do a 2-parter. Like I'll have this be a 2-parter because, you know, I don't want to, like, make this video excessively long and stuff. You guys would hate me for that. Flip Slide. Flip Slide is a fantastic game. The way I've explained this to people who have never experienced electronic games in general, like, I can't have a really great analogy for it. Like, how does it go? Bop-It and Simon are like water, whereas, like, by comparison, Flip Slide is the electronic gaming of a fine wine. Like, put that into context. Like, everyone drinks water, metaphorically, like, because, like, a lot of people who are electronic gamers, everyone loves Bop-It or Simon. And, you know, wine isn't the most accessible thing out there. And, you know, if you start playing electronic games and you start with Flip Slide, you are going to be really, really scared out of your mind. Not, like, to a literal extent, but, like, it's going to seem very alien to you at first, if that makes sense. I've mentioned this before as well, but I'm repeating it for the sake of, you know, people who have just subscribed to my channel and don't know about this. This game was not only invented by a very close friend of Dan Klitzner being the inventor of Bop-It, by the way, but it was actually originally pitched to Hasbro. Let me repeat that. It was originally pitched to Hasbro. They did turn it down, thankfully. I say thankfully because, yeah, you know. The game itself is very, very complicated and straightforward at the exact same time. You know, as I mentioned prior, it's very, very scary to people who've never played electronic games as a medium before. But I actually bring that because I had a hard time playing it at first. But it's something that you need a learning curve for for it to become one of your favorite electronic games of all time, if that makes sense. Interestingly enough, when I first unboxed mine on camera, which is the reason why I didn't upload my unboxing video of it, I didn't know it was actually physically screwed to its packaging. Yeah, that's so weird, but very creative at the exact same time. And last but not least, on a very deep, philosophical, and meaningful note, first let me put these things back up on my bookshelf. Pardon me. Oh, hey, Bop-It Extreme. Where are you? There you are. We have the world's smallest Bop-It, which is going to have, and still actually already still does, have a very, very special place in my heart. I know it's gonna sound really, cheesy, sappy, saccharine, cliche, whatever, but, it's not going to change the fact that my words are true when I say that this thing is very, very special to me. Not only have I been an electronic gaming veteran with 25 years of experience under his belt, but, I celebrated my 25th anniversary last year, so did Bop-It, actually, which, the stand for it, which is actually a little hole where the, peg that is attached to the pedestal attaches to, they connect is what I'm trying to say. It's up there on top of my bookshelf, but, me and Bop-It celebrated our 25th anniversaries last year, and I interviewed Dan Klitzner last year as well. I've said this before, but, again, for those who are just subscribed to my channel, I don't value my interview of Dan Klitzner just because, lol, he's famous, or just because he's the inventor of Bop-It. No, I actually value that interview because he was very, very nice to talk to as a person. And every time, and I do mean literally every time, I play the world's smallest Bop-It, I will always reminisce on how much, I got a chance to get to know Dan on a personal level, especially for those who've actually watched my interview, we talked extensively about, inventing in general. How is this concept going to actually take off? Will it take off with a mainstream audience? Which reminds me, Bop-It almost didn't take off in general. It almost bombed financially, from what I remember. It was a concept that a lot of people didn't like at first. And I mean, a lot of people in general back in 1996 when the game first initially launched, by the way. But, for something that can be seen as very, very silly and annoying to take off with such a massive audience, like it or not, Bop-It is here to stay, and it's a very, very influential game in the most positive of ways. Whenever I play this, like I said earlier, I'm always going to look back and reminisce on that interview with Dan Klitzner on a very, very sentimentally valuable level. That was one of the greatest highlights of my entire life. I can die a happy man knowing that I interviewed one of my favorite people of all time. I've always wanted to interview Dan Klitzner, and again, not just because he's the inventor of Bop-It or just because he's famous, because openly speaking, as someone who wants to form a stronger connection with people in general across the world and just, make peace, that's why, and I am not ashamed to admit this, yes, despite the fact that, you can't see, when I'm not recording, when I'm not recording videos or when I'm not posting videos, I have no shame in admitting that, yes, I do cry every time. I cry tears of joy knowing that, again, I can go out knowing that I did my thing. I did something that has been on my bucket list for the longest time. Interviewing Mr. Klitzner was one of the most wonderful experiences of all time. And just the fact that I can, reminisce on such a wonderful memory every time I play the world's smallest Bop-It, wow, dude, it is just one of the most positive and uplifting memories I will always hold on to. So with that all being said, this is Sir Bop-A-Lot, signing out.